Today, we know Scott Dixon is one of the most beloved veterans in IndyCar history, with over 300 race starts and 54 wins in IndyCar.
It is going to be Dixon taking the win!
Scott Dixon!
Scott Dixon!
Scott Dixon wins in Texas!
But before all that, Scott Dixon was a rookie.
Here in Nazareth, the drivers have something to prove as they prepare for the 15th running of the Nazareth 225.
It's May 6th, 2001, and the kart series has turned up to Nazareth, Pennsylvania for the Lehigh Valley Grand Prix at Nazareth Speedway, and just the third round of the 2001 kart season. Scott Dixon would also be making his third career start at the top level of single-seater racing. Dixon would be driving for PacWest Racing, a now defunct racing team, which, let's just say, didn't have the best car. Dixon would qualify on the 12th row in the 23rd slot and almost 8 miles an hour off the pace of the leaders. And this 2001 kart field was a field that was absolutely stacked with talent. Just to name a few: Michael Andretti, Paul Tracy, Brian Herta, Oriol Servia, Helio Castroneves, and many, many more. But the most important one for the purposes of today's video is Kenny Brack. And Kenny was a bit of a legend in his own right, in 1999 becoming the first Swedish driver ever to win the Indianapolis 500 and winning the IRL championship in 1998. However, Kenny had never won in kart, and he was hoping that today could be the day, starting in second position on the front row of the grid and having one of the most dominant cars of the season. Needless to say, Kenny was in with a really good shot, but the time for talk was over. It was time to go racing.
Field already formed on the backstretch. The front row, Junqueira and Kenny Brack. Kenny Brack has started the front row in every race this year. They close in tightly. They all understand how critical the start is and how difficult it is to pass. Green flag flies. Junqueira and Brack go side by side. Junqueira's forced down low. We have a car sliding.
Looks like Brian Herta.
The cars were barely even through turn 1 when Kenny was able to take the lead. Fortunately for him, the move would happen just before the caution would come out right at the start of the race, due to Brian Herta spinning off down onto the warm-up track. Brian Herta was ultimately undamaged, and Scott Dixon was also able to keep his nose clean during this race start. The broadcast would then cut to commercial break, and we'd come back to this news.
Welcome back to Nazareth Speedway. Still under yellow, but a different reason now. We had first the spin of Brian Herta, and then as they were getting ready to go back to the green flag, Helio Castroneves got himself in trouble.
Same problem as before with Brian Herta coming off the last corner. He picks up the throttle.
So after Helio Castroneves tried out his experimental line, the race officials were very quick to throw the caution, and that little incident right there would trigger a full course yellow, which would have many knock-on consequences.
The slide caused little damage to the outside edges of his wing. This is rookie Scott Dixon, who just came into the pits and almost immediately back out.
Strategy, they're at the back. They qualified 23rd. They figured we might as well top up with fuel with now 8 laps in the book.
So as you heard there, Scott Dixon would come in on only lap 8 to top off his fuel. Now, of course, this is only possible because of Helio's second little spin there that extended the caution, but also because, well, Dixon was already at the back of the field. There was really no disadvantage to Dixon for going in and getting, 8 laps more of fuel than what everybody else had at the time. So really a smart move from Dixon and the team to start off the race. But it would be third time's a charm, as on the third attempt at the restart, Kenny Brack would launch and we would actually get a decent period of green flag racing.
Green flag comes out. This time Kenny Brack got a good jump on the green and accelerates away.
Fast forward to lap 46, and Kenny Brack is going so fast that he's already caught up to the back of the field and is starting to lap traffic. Now, unfortunately for us Dixon fans, Dixon is at the back of the field right now, and Kenny Brack is seriously closing on him very quick, so Dixon needs to make something happen. And once Dixon saw Brack closing in behind him, he must have thought the same thing, because he quickly went around Alex Zanardi, probably fearing for his race life at this point. Almost 20 laps later on lap 65, and we would truly see how crucial it was that Scott Dixon got around Zanardi when he did, as Kenny Brack is still behind Zanardi. But here on lap 65, he would be able to make the pass, and we would quickly see just how much quicker he was, and he would start once again again closing up to the rear end of Dixon at a rapid rate. But fortunately for Scott Dixon, on lap 74, Michel Jourdain would spin his car, once again bringing out the caution and providing some much needed relief from the attack of Kenny Brack behind. When the pits finally opened up under this yellow, many cars would opt to come in for service, including the race leader of Kenny Brack. However, someone notable who would not come into the pits at this time was Scott Dixon. You see, because he had pit a little bit earlier and gotten that 8 laps extra fuel, it allowed him the option to not pit under this yellow, and he was able to cycle out up into 13th place by the time everybody was done pitting. And Kenny Brack was also able to maintain his spot at the lead of the race. It would then be on lap 83 that we would go back to green in Nazareth.
Looking for green. We've got it. We're back racing at Nazareth.
Now this next stint of the race would be pretty quiet for both of our protagonists here. One thing that would become clear during this stint is that Kenny Brack was just the fastest driver on track today. As soon as the start happened, he absolutely pulled out a massive gap on the car in second place and was lapping cars at a pretty incredible clip. Scott Dixon wouldn't manage to do much during this stint, although he did hold place in 13th position, surrounded by cars that were definitely a little bit faster than him, so good work on him to be able to hold that position. But it wouldn't be too long until we'd get our next mix-up.
And the yellow flag is out. Car looks like Takagi came down across the grass and then continued on.
And what we had here was another incident very similar to what we had been seeing all day, with drivers just getting on the throttle a little bit too hard coming out of that final corner and whipping the back end around. Once again, no damage to Takagi here, but it was enough for the officials to go ahead and throw out the caution flag. And fortunately so for Scott Dixon, as this caution lined up perfectly with the pit window that he needed to hit based on that last pit stop made on lap 8. However, even with that being the case, it still wasn't clear at the time if the cars pitting under this caution would be able to make it to the end on the fuel that they got during this stop. And it was at this time that ABC Sports, in their vast wisdom, would decide to go to commercial break right before the restart. But I'm sure nothing important's going to go down at all during the restart, right?
Well, back at Nazareth Speedway, while we were away, they brought the green flag out again, and then almost immediately ended up with 2 cars together.
Coming down into turn 3, DeFerrin looking down on the inside, tag turns towards the apex, they make contact right front to left rear, spinning both cars into the wall.
So after the fantastic timing on that commercial break there, we came back to realize that we were going to be under yellow a little bit longer here. Now, this yellow was very different than the yellows that we'd had so far all day. First of all, because this was a real wreck out on the racetrack there, kart officials opted to have the cars circulate in the warm-up lane, meaning they had a shorter distance to cover than what the normal lap is around Nazareth. The net effect of this being less fuel burned for everybody. This yellow period would also be very, very lengthy, a long time, over 20 laps under caution here during this period. And as far as pit cycles go under this yellow, everybody who chose not to pit during the previous yellow when Dixon did would now come down pit lane, including our race leader Kenny Brack. Well, I should say everybody except 3 cars who did opt to stay out, having last pitted on lap 72, and these 3 cars would remain in the lead of the race on the restart, meaning that after all was said and done, it would be Dixon in 5th place and Brack down in 10th. And once again, we still didn't know, would these cars have to make another stop? Were they good to run to the end? It was still kind of up in the air, but one thing was for sure, this extended yellow period where they're running around that warm-up lane is definitely a big help to anybody trying to save fuel right now. But finally, on lap 144, it would be time to go racing again, and it would be Kenny Brack this time who would launch an incredible charge right off the bat, and he did not waste any time getting to work, getting around some of these cars.
Green flag is out. Here we go again. Whoa, close fight back there as Kenny Brack tries to come up through this field just as fast as he can.
It would also be at this time that we'd get another very timely commercial break from ABC.
Back at Nazareth Speedway, there are the current standings. You'll notice that Brack is now 5th. While we were away, he just suddenly lit the wick and came charging as hard as he could. Here's how it happened.
Exit
First, it
speed.
was this move on Christian Fittipaldi.
Exit speed and horsepower. He goes around Christian Fittipaldi on the outside of the king. A very, very prodigious move.
Jimmy Vasser was next.
Once again, remember, these strategies are now playing out. He just powers right by Vasser.
And Kenny Breck has made it now around Paul Tracy.
This is the strategy playing out, as we said. There's more fuel available, more horsepower. Kenny Breck, the dominant driver with Team Rahal since the beginning of the season, says, this is my race, I want it, and I'm coming forward now.
And now it's rookie Scott Dixon, currently third, that Breck has in his sights.
And just like that, Kenny Breck had now closed up again to the rear end of Scott Dixon, a very similar sight to what we saw earlier in this race, except this time, they're racing for position. Dixon's no longer a lap down. Breck is no longer a full lap ahead. They are now even on track, with Dixon having pit a little bit earlier than Breck at this point. But it would not be long at all until Breck started to try and put some moves on Scott Dixon.
Breck looks inside of Dixon.
It would also be at this time that those three cars who had been running in front of Dixon, who remember pitted on lap 76, they would now have to start heading for pit lane.
And here comes Kenny Breck, now third, with Shinji Nakano's stop. And still working on Dixon, though this time it's a battle for second.
Go ahead and cue up that timely ABC commercial break.
Well, figuring out where to put commercials in a race like this is a tough job, and the truck's been doing the best they can. Scott Dixon now has the lead. Kenny Breck into second, and why? We were right thinking about Tony Kanaan. Despite the fact his crew suggested they were going to keep him out for a while, his engine decided it wanted a little more methanol if it was going to do that. As he slowed, Scott Dixon took over the lead. And then as he headed for the pits, Kenny Breck thought he'd go to the inside. Well, wrong place to go. He had to sweep back to the outside and stay in second place ahead of Paul Tracy. But now he's climbing all over the back of Dixon. And Dixon should be pretty close on fuel too.
He sure should. He must be making fuel out there, but Scott Dixon has got to come into the pit lane sometime soon.
And if you're someone who knows about Dixon watching this in 2023 or beyond, that is like music to your ears. You've heard it 1,000 times before, and you know Dixon is built different, man.
And the question remains now, who has fuel and who doesn't? Here's the last set of stops. Dixon on 116, Breck much later.
It's going to be all about fuel at the end.
Well, and on the fuel, looking at those numbers, Scott Dixon probably be on fumes at the finish, but he may be able to make the finish.
It would then be on lap 213 that we would see our final caution of the day, and with only 8 to go, it would now be a shootout to the finish between Scott Dixon and Kenny Breck for each of what would be their first win in kart.
We're ready to go back to green flag racing. A rookie has to bring him back. He's got to figure all of this out now if he wants to win. And he does a pretty nice job of it as Dixon accelerates away from second place Kenny Breck.
An amazing job, and holding off Kenny Breck under this scenario here with less than 4 to go, in my mind, is just astounding.
White flag will come out to Scott Dixon, the rookie, trying to score a win on an oval. Let's see if he can do it. Kenny Breck is right there, traffic just ahead. He's just got to negotiate this traffic. Kenny Breck moves to the inside. Now tries to sweep to the outside. Doesn't look like it's going to happen for Breck, but it will happen for Scott Dixon. The rookie becomes the 46th driver to win in kart.
If you guys did enjoy this video, I've got another one on screen now that I think you're really going to like about Scott Dixon's latest win. But that was how Scott Dixon stunned the world on his debut win. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you did enjoy, and I'll see you in the next one.